the dining platform. Nada tu cura we. Tom document the deal he left.
Oh, what the heck? Say, la frontiera, la ella de ahí.
Some that the deal we were. The over me we were hitting out the two him.
Ysleta Pueblo is a community of Tiguas-speaking Indians south of Albuquerque. Here on the Rio Grande, Pueblo culture has been perpetuated for 1,000 years. From 1540 to 1821, Ysleta was near the northern edge of New Spain. The Spaniards established Catholicism and took control of the regional economy, eventually forcing the Pueblo villages into the Hispanic world empire. In the 1680s, there was a violent backlash known as the Pueblo Indian Revolt. The Spaniards retreated downriver to the El Paso area. With them were several hundred Indian refugees and captives. The origin of Pueblo Indians in Texas would later be a subject of confusion for many people.
From my understanding, and again, I'm not sure, but from my understanding, during the Pueblo Revolt, a number of tribal people from here were recruited as scouts, and they took them down there, or they went down there with their families and all, and settled down in the El Paso area. Basically, I guess those people that went down to El Paso took a few things with them, a drum, and I don't know what other things that they took with them from here.
The displaced Ysleta Indians, called Tiguas, were settled a few miles southeast of what is now downtown El Paso, Texas, at a new Ysleta of the south, Ysleta Del Sur. A Pueblo mission dedicated to the Tiguas' patron, St. Anthony of Padua, was established, and it became the nucleus of a community that has existed for 300 years, the oldest continuous settlement in Texas.
Over those 300 years, these things have slowly eroded as far as keeping touch with the language, the traditions, the ceremonies, all those things. Of course, they've been interbreeding with non-Indians down there, to where I personally seriously question the blood quantum of down there as far as their Indian blood. I'm sure they're all descendants, but as far as the actual blood quantum, I don't know about that. I question that myself. But anyway, over the years they have lost traditions.
In maintaining their traditions, the Ysletas in New Mexico enjoy the luxury of relative isolation. In comparison, the members of the daughter community in Texas have faced intense pressure from surrounding cultures. Land rights supposedly granted to the Tiguas under Spanish rule were not recognized as the territory came under United States control. Because Texas was part of the Confederacy when Lincoln granted reservations to the Pueblo tribes, the Tiguas did not receive such protection. During the 1870s, Anglo-Americans took control of most Tiguan lands through legal maneuvers.
One day I was talking to Miguel Pedraza, and I asked Miguel, I said, did the Indians used to own this land? Do you have any tradition that this was once your land? He said, oh yes, all of this was our land. He said, I can take you and show you the corners. My grandfather, Miguel was raised by his grandfather. His father had been killed in a gun battle with Texas Rangers. And he was raised by his grandfather. That's one reason he was such a reservoir of the language and the customs and the dances and the songs. And anyway, he said, I can take you and show you the corners, and he subsequently did show me the corners. I've located every corner of the grant, and they agree exactly with the Spanish documents. And Miguel then told me, I said, Miguel, how did you lose the lands? Do you know that? Is there a story on that? He said, oh yes. He said, I can tell you, because my grandfather's plot was right up the valley here. And we went up and looked at the farm that had been his grandfather's. And he said, my grandfather went out one day to clean out the ditch, and there was an Anglo man on horseback who told him to get off the property because he had a paper from the city that said it was his. And I said, when was this, Miguel? He said, oh, it was a long time ago, in the last century, I said, well, that can't be. This wasn't incorporated. I was in law school when Ysleta was annexed to the city of El Paso, and that was in the mid-50s. So it can't be, Miguel. The city wasn't here then. He said, oh, no. He said, my grandfather told me. And I couldn't believe it. I just said, well, it's just something that that Miguel didn't understand right or the grandfather was just dead wrong about. Well, you know, he was absolutely right. The city of Ysleta was incorporated in 1872 and remained a city for 3 years while the city fathers gave away all of the lands to the Anglos of the El Paso Valley.
A vast metropolitan area is formed by El Paso and adjacent Ciudad Juarez, even though the two cities are separated by the U.S.-Mexican border. The Tiwa community was engulfed in this urban landscape dominated by Anglo and Hispanic influences. Over time, the Indian presence was masked by Hispanic culture as the Tiwas adopted the Spanish language and Mexican dress.
The people here in El Paso did not dress as Indians and carry on their celebrations openly and differentiate themselves because they knew when they did that, they become the butt of jokes, that they became subject to prejudice and bigotry exercised primarily by the Mexicans who did see them as Indians. And as a result, they did not advertise their presence. There was no benefit in being Indian. You got laughed at. Let's face it, in this community, Mexicans have been discriminated against ever since the Anglos got here. And let's face it, until recently, the Mexicans all discriminated against the Indians living in the Ysleta area. They just wouldn't admit they were Indian because they didn't know but what there was some penalty in store for them if they were.
Rudy Colmenero is a Tiwa, but his Indian heritage may not be obvious from his appearance or occupation. Another Tiwa, Tomas Silvas, is a manager at an El Paso supermarket.
There's no such thing as a pure culture unless it's a culture that no longer exists. So one of the problems that you have in terms of stereotypes and in terms of perception of Indians, in terms of perception of our place in our society, is that people have a tendency to want to or to like to see Indians as they were, not Indians as they are. It's funny because I pick up newspapers sometimes and you know, old newspapers or old writings, and they talk about how the anthropologists and the ethnographers and so on had all believed that the Tiwas had no longer existed. They were looking, in a great sense, at the outside. And in some sense, some of them were looking for the stereotypes.
In 1958, the fate of the Tiwa neighborhood, or Barrio de los Indios, was put in jeopardy. The city of El Paso annexed Ysleta, imposing property taxes that threatened to drive many Tiwas from their homes. Faced with the possible breakup of their community, the Tiwas decided to take control of their own affairs. They sought official recognition as an Indian tribe. After hundreds of years of quietly being Indian, they now had to prove their cultural identity to the United States, the state of Texas, and all other Pueblo tribes.
Congress said that we were a group of people that got together and said we wanted to be Indians. It takes ignorance. It takes someone so smart that they're really ignorant to say something like that.
El Paso attorney Tom Diamond understood the Indians' plight. In 1962, he began publicizing their culture and their economic situation. It took until 1968 to gain both state and federal recognition, for there were many bureaucratic and philosophical issues involved.
First, the Indian Bureau telling me that you could only recognize an Indian tribe by treaty or presidential proclamation or act of Congress. So I wrote back and said, we'll take any one of those three, you know.